Germany just posted the best month for electric car sales in its history. Its own dealer association looked at that record and said, on the record, a huge share of those cars were never actually bought by anyone. We'll get into exactly how many and the trick that makes an unsold car count as sold in the official numbers. This isn't a story about whether electric cars are good or bad. It's about how a country's single most watched economic number can be technically true and still tell you almost nothing real, once you understand exactly how that number gets made. Quick context. After a funding cutoff gutted German EV demand for 2 years, a new government subsidy launched in late 2025, aimed at getting affordable EVs to ordinary buyers. Every month since, the registration numbers climbed, culminating in July 2026's record 78,609 battery electric registrations, a 62% jump, 29.3% of the entire market. Politicians and trade press treated it as proof the subsidy worked. Here's where it gets complicated, and it's not a fringe theory or an outside critic. It's coming from the people who actually sell the cars for a living. This matters more in Germany than almost anywhere else. The auto sector employs roughly 780,000 people directly and supports millions more in suppliers and dealerships, and the government has leaned on the EV registration number specifically as its main proof point that the country's biggest industrial transition is on track. Back in December 2025, when battery electric registrations jumped 58.5% in a single month, ZDK President Thomas Peckrun, the head of Germany's Central Association for the Motor Vehicle Trade, representing the dealers themselves, not some outside skeptic, went on the record with a warning that most of that month's coverage didn't mention at all. The apparent ramp-up of electromobility is standing on shaky legs, he said in an official statement. In reality, a large share of the new EVs are initially just landing on factory and dealer lots. He wasn't being vague about it either. That same month, the ZDK's own data showed that nearly 1 in 4 newly registered cars in Germany was what's called an Eigenzulassung, a self-registration. That's when a manufacturer, or a dealership, or an affiliated leasing or rental arm registers a brand new car in its own name rather than an actual paying retail customer taking delivery. The car counts as sold the moment the paperwork is filed with the authorities. It shows up in the monthly KBA registration statistics, the same national data every headline about the EV boom is built on. Exactly the same as a car bought by a real person walking into a showroom and driving it home. Industry analysts generally treat anything above roughly 20% of total registrations coming through this channel as a signal of tactical manipulation rather than organic retail demand. Peckrun's own numbers in real time were already sitting well past that line, and there's little indication the underlying pattern reversed itself by the time July's record-breaking numbers came in 7 months later.
To be fair here, because the story deserves that fairness, self-registration isn't new and it isn't illegal. Manufacturers have used it for decades to move demonstrator vehicles, short-term rental fleet cars, and end-of-quarter inventory that needs to shift before the books close. A baseline level of it is completely normal in this industry and doesn't imply anything sinister on its own. What's different now, according to the people whose job it is to actually sell these cars to real people, is the scale it's reached and what that scale is being used to paper over. If you're the kind of person who wants to know what's actually behind a record month headline instead of just the headline itself, that's what this channel is for every week. Subscribing helps me keep digging into stories like this one. No pressure, but I'd appreciate it. So why would a manufacturer register a car to itself instead of just waiting for a real buyer to walk in? The honest answer is that registration numbers aren't just a marketing statistic. They're tied directly to money and regulation in ways that create real structural pressure to hit a number, any number, by the end of the month or the end of the quarter, regardless of actual retail demand. The European Union's CO2 fleet targets are calculated based on registered vehicles, not vehicles sitting unsold in a lot somewhere else. A manufacturer that registers a battery electric car, even one nobody has actually bought yet, gets to count that zero-emission vehicle toward its fleet average immediately, which can mean the difference between meeting a regulatory target and facing a fine measured in the hundreds of millions of euros across an entire model range. That's not a small incentive. For a large manufacturer, it can be worth more than the cost of the car itself several times over. Sales targets built into manufacturer-to-dealer contracts work similarly. Hitting a quarterly registration number can trigger bonuses, protect a dealer's allocation of next quarter's more desirable inventory, or simply avoid contractual penalties for undershooting, regardless of whether an actual paying customer ever signed anything. The result is what several dealers, speaking on condition of anonymity to industry press over the past year, have described bluntly: cars accumulating on factory and dealership lots, financed at real, rising interest rates. German short-term auto financing costs have been running as high as 9% this year after the European Central Bank's rate hike in June, while officially sitting in the books as completed sales. From a regulatory and headline standpoint, the car is sold, done, counted. From a balance sheet standpoint, for the dealer physically holding it on their lot, it's unsold inventory nobody's paying for, quietly accumulating interest charges every single month it sits there waiting for a real customer to show up. Put a number on it to see why this matters. On a mid-range EV costing roughly 40,000 euros, sitting unsold at 9% annual interest costs a dealer something like 300 euros a month just in financing cost, before storage, insurance, and the eventual discount needed to actually move it once a real buyer finally shows interest in a car that's no longer brand new. Multiply that across a lot with dozens of self-registered vehicles sitting for months, and the record month that made headlines starts looking from inside the dealership a lot more like a bill coming due later. Here's the pattern underneath all of this, and it's one that shows up anywhere a single number gets treated as definitive proof that something is working. Once an industry, a government, and financial markets all start watching one specific statistic as the measure of success, there's enormous pressure, structural pressure, not necessarily anyone individually lying, to make that statistic look good, even when the underlying reality is messier and more complicated. Nobody in this chain has to be acting in bad faith for the distortion to happen. A car manufacturer facing a multi-hundred million euro EU emissions fine and a dealer trying to protect next quarter's allocation of more desirable inventory are both making individually rational, defensible decisions under the rules exactly as written. The distortion emerges from the combination of everyone's separate rational incentives, not from any single bad actor pulling strings.
This also means the headline number and the on-the-ground reality can both be technically true at the same time, while describing two genuinely different things. Germany's EV registrations really did hit a record in July 2026. That's not disputed, and it's not fabricated. Some meaningful share of that record really is manufacturer and dealer self-registration, rather than retail demand from an actual household deciding to buy an EV. That's also not disputed, not by outside critics, but by the dealer's own trade association. Both statements survive a fact check independently. The only way to know which one actually matters more for judging the health of the transition is to ask the people standing on the lot next to the unsold inventory, which is exactly what the ZDK did on the record, and what most of the record month coverage simply didn't bother to include. You can see the same underlying pattern in plenty of other industries that have nothing to do with cars. Anytime a single, easily quotable statistic becomes the shorthand proof that a strategy is working, a subscriber count, a units shipped figure, a same-store sales number, the people whose bonuses, budgets, or regulatory compliance depend on that number will find legal, defensible ways to move it, whether or not the underlying business reality moves with it. The number isn't fake, it's just measuring something narrower than everyone assumes it's measuring. This isn't a purely statistical curiosity confined to spreadsheets at the KBA. It's landing on an industry that's already under real strain from several directions at once, and the timing makes the registration question matter more, not less. Germany's largest automaker, Volkswagen, is reportedly planning to cut up to 100,000 jobs group-wide, roughly double what was previously announced to employees and unions, with 4 German plants, including sites in Hanover, Zwickau, and Emden, under review for possible closure or downsizing, affecting tens of thousands of workers directly. Porsche, part of the same corporate family, has its own future package restructuring underway, and roughly a third of its dealerships in China are reportedly set to close as premium demand cools there too. Auto dealer insolvencies have been rising steadily through 2026, and German trade press has specifically linked a number of these cases to older, unsold inventory sitting on lots for extended periods, tying up capital dealers can't recover until someone actually buys the car and contributed to both sales figures. And in Tesla's case, the one major EV brand largely excluded from this specific self-registration conversation since it sells mostly direct-to-consumer rather than through the traditional third-party dealer networks legacy manufacturers rely on. July 2026 registrations in Germany collapsed to just 367 cars, a decline of nearly 67% year-over-year. That's a genuine, much harder to manufacture away decline, even accounting for Tesla's known pattern of bunching deliveries toward the end of each quarter, since the same quarter timing pattern existed a year earlier too, and still produced roughly 3 times as many registrations. Put those two things side by side, and you get an uncomfortable picture worth sitting with. The parts of the German EV market most able to lean on registration tactics are the ones posting the record headlines. The one major brand largely without that lever available is showing what may be a closer approximation of the real, weaker state of German consumer demand for electric vehicles right now, regardless of what you think of that brand or its CEO. Whether the rest of the market's record month holds up the same way likely depends on how many of those self-registered cars actually find real buyers in the months ahead, versus how many keep quietly accumulating interest charges on a dealer's balance sheet until something has to give. If you want more stories like this, the number behind the number, that's exactly what this channel does every week. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing it.